Expert Forum for producers and users of disaster-related statistics. You ended the day with me yesterday and you start with me again today, but not for long. I apologize. For those of you who didn't meet me yesterday, I'm Kanza Ahmed. I'm the Head of Global Disasters, Climate and Health at the UK Health Security Agency, and I'm also co-chair of the Interagency Expert Group on Disaster-Related Statistics, alongside Rike Monk-Hansen of UN ESCAP and Animesh Kumar of UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. So this is the third session of the forum this week, and our focus today is on disaster impact statistics. And we've got a slide with main objectives and questions that are going to be addressed, which will be shared throughout the session. But for today's session, our focus is on 4 absolutely excellent speakers. And each of them are going to get 15 minutes to present, and then followed by a question and answer session in which we really invite everybody here to join in, to put your questions in the chat, and we really do want to hear from you and take the opportunity to speak to our experts. But actually, it's not going to be me chairing the entire session. We have an absolutely fabulous moderator in Professor Urbano Prapelio. And Professor Urbano is Professor of Human Geography at the University of Extremadura in Spain. He currently serves as the European Science and Technology Advisory Group for the UNDRR, and he's also a research associate at the Institute of Conflicts and Humanitarian Action, and an honorary research fellow with the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CAIAT, and a member of the Academy of Europe. His research interests lie in disaster risk governance, with particular emphasis on institutional frameworks and policy solutions for disaster risk reduction. So on behalf of the team, I want to take this opportunity to thank Professor Urbano for agreeing to moderate today's session, and I will hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kanza. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here to help guide us through today's discussion. So as you can see, soon we have a fantastic lineup of speakers bringing together experts from government, regional institutions, and academia to explore how disaster impact statistics are being used to inform recovery, planning, and risk reduction from both users and producers of these statistics. For the first presentation of this session on disaster impact statistics, we are honored to begin with insights from Mrs. Giselle Myers, who is a senior economist at the Economic and Social Development Unit of the Economic Planning Division, the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. She joined the Economic Planning Division in 2002 and was appointed senior economist in 2018. And with over 20 years of experience in the Economic Planning Division, she has worked on several key initiatives, including policy development and climate financing activities. She will be sharing a compelling country example of how St. Vincent and the Grenadines has applied post-disaster needs assessment methodologies following Hurricane Beryl. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Myers, and please go ahead and share your presentation. Here we go. Please, Mrs. Myers, you can start whenever you wish. Is there something wrong with your connection?
Hi, good morning. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, yes, I realized that when I turn my video on, my internet is dropping out, so I'll have to do the presentation without a video. I must apologize for that. Okay, so thank you for the warm introduction. First of all, let me express thanks for the invitation to share our country's experience in the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl, and in particular, the PD&A process. As you're aware, it's little over a year that St. Vincent and the Grenadines was impacted by devastating hurricane of a Category 4. It left a trail of destruction that destroyed not only physical infrastructure, but uprooted livelihood and claimed the lives of a few persons. It tested not only the resilience of our infrastructure, but also that of Vincentians. We were challenged to respond rapidly and coordinate effectively as we plan immediate relief and recovery. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as many will be aware, is a multi-island state of approximately 142 square miles and a population of an estimate of around 110,000. As a small island developing state, the country is vulnerable to natural hazards, including hurricanes, flooding, landslides, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. Hurricane Beryl's impact was catastrophic, and the PD&A process was a pivotal part of the effort as it brought together government agencies, developing partners, civil societies, community-based organizations in a coordinated manner to assess damage, estimate recovery needs, and chart a path forward that is grounded not only in conversations, but in data and shared commitment. So we had varying levels of impacts recorded across the multi-island state. On the 12th of July, 2024, the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines submitted to the UN Residence Coordinator's Office in Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean a request to conduct a post-disaster needs assessment. Can I have the first slide up, please? I'm not seeing the slides.
The current slide describes the PD&A process. Is that okay?
Yes, please. Yeah, that will be okay. So the intention was to determine the damage and losses and the impact of Hurricane Beryl and what are the respective recovery needs for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The government had indicated that the assessment would orient the national recovery planning efforts, multi-stakeholder participation, and strengthen long-term resilience. So the post-disaster needs assessment will be conducted based on the collection of pre-disaster and post-disaster data and information. It will assess damage and losses in priority social, productive, and infrastructure sectors. It will also look at the impacts and what are the recovery needs for the sectors as a way of ensuring improved resilience to the most affected groups of the population in terms of their living conditions, livelihoods, gender equality, food security, and social inclusion. So the impact statistics here was not only to gather information at the pre and post level, but to ensure that the quantitative data measures the effects of the disaster or event on people and their systems. So it goes beyond describing what happened and instead captured the consequences and changes that result. Can I have the second slide? So the PD&A process looked at those across three broad sectors, social, infrastructure, productive, along with cross-cutting teams, and address all across all sectors. The social sectors mainly focused on education, health, housing, and culture. The productive sectors included agriculture, tourism, and infrastructure focused on transport, energy, water, and electricity, or WASH. And we also, in terms of the cross-cutting, we looked at the macroeconomic impact, human impact, and cross-cutting themes such as gender, environment, social protection, disaster risk reduction, livelihood, food security, and living condition. Hurricane Beryl impacted many sectors. In particular, if we looked at housing, that is a fourth slide that should be up. There was a total of 4,243 dwellings that were affected by Hurricane Beryl, of which 1,720 were in Union Island, 1,087 in Canouan, 245 in Mairo, and 1,195 on mainland St. Vincent and Bequia. In terms of human impacts, a total of 1,505 persons were displaced and had to seek refuge in shelters. 30% of them were males, and 33% were females, and 37% were children. We have had several lessons learned. Can I have the fifth slide? Several lessons learned from the PDNA experience in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In the past, post-disaster data collection on island mostly catered around the humanitarian response, that is the immediate needs of providing shelter, food, health, and logistics. However, these assessments only give us a picture of relief, what are the relief and delivery that we are giving to the displaced population. Placing displaced population in shelters around the country, schools, churches, community centers. This response offered little insight into the broader socioeconomic impacts or pathways to recovery. While these responses give an idea of humanitarian, they were not very valuable for medium-term and long-term recovery strategies. They were very insufficient. It did not provide a valuable response to how do we plan in the medium and the long term. So the PDNA approach shows an important shift for us by producing impact statistics that connect humanitarian response with recovery planning. It goes beyond traditional relief metrics. So the assessment would have drawn on national statistics. Our National Statistics Office, as I must tell you, must note that it's located in the Economic Planning Division of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning and Information Technology. However, there are other ministries or other departments of government that also collect data. So this allows recovery planning to focus on how can we bring together all these various data sitting in different departments of government. The PDNA approach, however, allows for some form of not only focus on national statistics, but also sectoral reporting as it connects damages and losses. If I can move on to slide 6. Recovery depends on the existence of credible and robust data. The PDNA process in SVG faced the challenge of weak baseline data. For us, in the case of SVG, we were at the time of the hurricane conducting field work for our 2023 population and housing data. So to get some baseline data in terms of population sizes in the different islands in the Grenadines, we had to rely on somewhat old data from the 2012 population and housing census. So then this created, an issue in terms of, our baseline information. Looking ahead, and based on the PDNA process in SVG, there is a need for us to have some form of institutionalized, integrated data system. And the data must be one that is standardized across, the different MDAs, different ministries, departments, and agencies. Another challenge we had with our PDNA was the insufficient experts Apart from key government ministries, departments, and agencies, we had invited other stakeholders to be, part of the process of the PDNA. Sometimes this turns out to be difficult given the short time frame for the assessment. PDNAs are usually done, in a rapid manner shortly after an event. No more than, in our case, we started a PDNA around August, and it was completed around August of last year. It was completed around December, January. So in the terms of, having to mobilize experts, the PDNA doesn't allow for, that, the time frame is usually short. And as what we saw too was that many MDAs were occupied managing their own specific sector related issues. And, this proved sort of difficult in terms of getting information from them, because, they were, let's take the education sector, for instance, they were concentrating on getting children back in the classrooms, getting the, the schools repaired so that, the September term could have, started. So this created, as I said, some problems because, persons or experts were occupied managing their own sector-related issues. In terms of academia, we were not able to, have that opportunity to engage them in the PDNA for Beryl. Can I have the next slide, please? Looking ahead for SVG, the Hurricane Beryl PDNA in St. Lucia and the Grenadines reflected both progress and highlighted some ongoing gaps. On the other hand, it leveraged national statistics and sectoral reporting. And deliberate efforts were made to capture differentiated impacts across the many islands, households, and vulnerable groups. This emphasized our need to disaggregate impact statistics and to conform or align them with global call for equity-focused recovery. On the other hand, persistent gaps in baseline data, particularly in housing, livelihoods, and social protection, limited the precision of estimates and, it sort of slowed down the integration of how we capture human impact into recovery costing. Looking ahead, SVG's recovery policy should prioritize investment in national data systems across the different ministries in our national statistical systems, embedding routine collection of household and vulnerability data into national planning frameworks. By doing so, we will be able to ensure that future PDNAs and recovery strategies generate not just financial valuation of loss and damage, but also a reliable statistical picture of how disasters reshape livelihoods, poverty, and inequality. Strengthening this data foundation will be essential for mobilizing external support, targeting resources effectively, and steering recovery towards resilience and inclusion. We have to ensure too that our recovery should be aligned with our national economic and social development plan, particularly its overarching goals to reduce unemployment and poverty levels and achieve high levels of human and social development. There is still a continuing need to expand social protection programs to ensure that all vulnerable population receive assistance through the government hurricane relief grant. Our special priority, of course, will be the persons most impacted in the Southern Grenadines who are at risk of falling deeper into poverty, as well as people facing moderate or severe levels of food insecurity. We have to ensure as well that sector recovery plans should give priority to the poor and food insecure, especially in agriculture, tourism, and housing sectors. In closing, I would want to highlight that as well as there is still a need for more awareness as respect to the PDNA. You know, in terms of having a document completed, we have to ensure that the document is integrated into sector planning, and as well as there is still a continuous need for training in terms of PDNAs on island. CDMA has been supporting, you know, the country in terms of providing training to technical persons in the different ministries with respect to the PDNA process, but then there is still a need for more training for that, to ensure that future PDNAs can be conducted not only by consultants who support the process, but also, you know, persons on island. So I'll stop my presentation here for now.
Thank you, Giselle, for this presentation describing the challenges with the availability and production of data for PDNA, and also the needs to improve this production of this report. Our next speaker will bring a different perspective, as he comes from the development insurance sector. Gabriele Coccia is a senior risk management specialist at the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility. With over 17 years of experience in weather-related hazard and risk modeling, Gabriele has led the development of several risk models that support CCR, IF's sovereign and sector-specific insurance products. Unfortunately, Gabriele has a prior engagement, so won't be here for the question and answers session after the speakers have spoken. So we'd welcome 5 minutes of questions at the end of his presentation. Please do put any questions in the chat, and also you can put also questions to be formulated at the end regarding the session we have completed right now by Giselle. Thank you, Gabriele. Please share your presentation. You are muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfectly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry for that. Sorry for that. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to share some of our experience with the disaster loss data. So let me see if I can. Okay. I will talk today with starting with a brief introduction on the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, and then talking about how we use historical loss data, which are the main challenges that we have to face when we use this data, and what would make our life easier when we deal with historical loss data. So starting with the introduction of CRIF, sorry, I need to reduce this. Okay. CRIF is a parametric insurance mechanism for the Caribbean and Central America. And our vision is to be a leading global development insurer, providing disaster risk financing products and services to our members to improve the lives and livelihoods, strengthen resilience, and advance sustainable development agendas. Our success and value for our member is mainly measured by these 5 main topics that you see in the slide. So the quick liquidity. So CRIF provides liquidity within 14 days after an event, thanks to the parametric insurance product that we offer to our members. We contribute to close the protection gap, providing parametric insurance. We do that using our proprietary risk models, and these models have been developed specifically for the region. So we don't use third-party models produced by vendors that may sometimes are mainly focused on other region, a different market. So we can, in this way, customize and adapt our models and our product to the Caribbean and Central American regions. CRIF is a risk pooling. So being a risk pooling, this allows us to have the best reinsurance price. And this means that we can offer more accessible coverage and higher levels of protection. And finally, in terms of innovation, we develop products for emerging risk and risks that sometimes are not covered by traditional insurance, and also products for specific economic sectors. We are currently 35 members. We made more than $390 million in payments to our members since 2007. We offer now 9 products, and it's estimated that more than 5 million persons have benefited from CRIF payouts. And all our payments are made within 14 days, and we have a total coverage purchase that is above $1 billion US. Our uniqueness is providing parametric insurance policies. So parametric insurance, for those that are not familiar with that, is provide payments that are based on the intensity of an event. So, for example, wind speed for a tropical cyclone, or ground acceleration for an earthquake, or the rainfall volume for an excess rainfall event. And the payment amount for the event is calculated through a pre-agreed model. So this is the main difference with traditional insurance, is that we don't need loss adjustment, and that usually can take months or even years after an event to happen and to be completed. And so these allow to make payments very quickly, so immediately after an event. As I said, we make payments within 14 days and sometimes even earlier. And so in this way, CRIF represents a cost-effective way to finance the short-term liquidity upfront to begin recovery efforts after a catastrophic event, and filling the gap between the immediate response aid and the long-term recovery. And CRIF can provide payments to each member and for each peril that is up to $150 million US. These are just quickly the products that we offer to our members. So for at sovereign level for the governments, we have earthquake, tropical cyclone, excess rainfall. Then we have products for specific sector like coast for the fishery sector, or CPU for the electric utilities, quick for the water utilities. Then we also have a runoff product for fluvial flooding at the sovereign level, drought for the impacts to the agriculture sector, and finally, the Lively Protection Policy, LPP, that is a microinsurance for vulnerable groups. We made, since 2007, 78 payouts to 18 member governments, totaling $390 million. With, just to give some numbers, the highest payment was made to Grenada last year after a burial, a payment of $42 million. Trinidad and Tobago received the highest number of payments, 9 payments since 2007. Haiti received the highest total payments, totaling $78 million for different type of events, earthquake, excess rainfall. Among all the payments that we made since 2007, almost 20% were made to Central American countries, totaling $76 million. And the highest payment in Central America was made to Nicaragua after Tropical Cyclone Iota in 2020 for $20 million. And we require the countries to share the use of the payout. So countries can decide how to use the payments made by CRIF, but they are requested to report on this use. And as you can see, most of the payout that we made are used for immediate post-event activities. Then a smaller portion for long-term infrastructure work, for risk mitigation activities, or there are investment for the economic sector and like, for example, agriculture. And some are allocated contribution to the national budget or capitalization of recovery fund. So how do we use within this context the historical loss data that play a critical role in our work, and especially in what I specifically do within CRIF, regarding the risk model. The first main use that we make is to define the triggering levels for our policies. So our policies are triggered when an index exceeds a certain threshold, a certain level of intensity. We have different type of product. The simplest one, I would say, are those that based on that use indexes that are based on hazards, such as, for example, wind speed, rainfall volume, or ground acceleration or flood depth. And so we need to identify a relation between the index that we use and the actual losses in the ground. And so, for example, if we have an historical series of the index that we are using to trigger the policy, what we need to do is to compare that with the losses that historical events have caused, so that we can identify different triggering levels that represent different levels of intensity of the event, and so that are correlated to the losses that this event are caused. For example, we use this approach in products for wind farms or for drugs that are based on hazard-based indexes. And these triggering levels can be defined based on the historical losses and also on the knowledge of the process and the asset, of the asset vulnerability, but clearly the availability and the knowledge of the impact of historical events is critical for us to define this relation in this triggering level. However, there are several factors that can affect the relationship between the index and the loss, and it's not always possible to find a clear correlation. So for most complex cases, we use a different type of product that is more complex, and they have a loss-based index. So the index may represent direct losses or days of business interruption, for example, or the overall financial impact. In this case, what we want to do is to build a model that is able to replicate actually the losses, the historical losses that have been observed and reported. And we use this approach in our sovereign products, for example, for tropical cyclone, excess rainfall, fluvial flood, and earthquake, but also for the sector-specific products for water utilities, electric utilities, and the fishery sector. And in this case, the index is calculated using a full risk model that includes all the risk components, so hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. So as you probably know, the hazard is the component that assesses the hazard intensity and frequency of the events. So for example, tropical cyclone and the wind speed caused by a tropical cyclone. And for this component, we have historical data, observation that we can compare with those that our model provides based on input, for example, from the National Center. And this is the way we use to validate this component. The second component is exposure, that represents the spatial distribution and the value of the asset at risk. This is built using several sources of data, from sensors to satellite images. So we put together a lot of information that help us to describe how the assets are distributed across the whole domain of CRIF, so all Central American or Caribbean, and that is distributed across different occupancy type, different type of infrastructure and assets. And finally, the third component is the vulnerability. The vulnerability describes the relationship between the hazard intensity, so the wind speed, or the precipitation, and the losses that is caused to the exposed asset, to the exposure. Vulnerability is based, usually the vulnerability function are based on literature data, but then they need to be calibrated and adapted to specific cases. And this can happen only using historical loss data. So in this process, we compare what our model says based on literature data for vulnerability, and then we calibrate these curves and fine-tune them to better represent and reproduce what we have observed in the past, so the losses that have actually been reported. And another area where we use the historical loss data is for model validation. So the last component, the loss component, is the one that combines the hazard, exposure, and vulnerability to assess the post-disaster losses, is the one that actually produced the final value of our index that can trigger the policies. And this index should represent the severity and the amount of losses that the event has caused. To do that, we build what we call a consequence database that is built using information from several sources. As you can see in this table, we use data from MDAT, NOAA, and different insurance, and also local sources, so data such as those that have been presented by Giselle for St. Vincent, and very useful and vital for us. And so we compare the output of our model, like after an event, with this information that we can gather. And what we clearly want is that the output of our model is very close to what has been observed. But as you can see in this chart, where you have the reported losses on the x-axis and the modeled losses on the y-axis, and for each of these events, you can see a horizontal bar that represents the variation of the information that we can find from the different sources. And there are some cases where this variation is used. This range of value is quite huge. So we find sometimes very different loss estimates from different sources for the same event. So what are the main challenges that we have when we use historical loss data? First one is understanding what is actually reported in what we find and when the number that we get. Is that the losses are just related to direct losses? They do include business interruption. They do include the impact, general impact to the economy. So what are the components? What is taken into account when these losses estimates are built? And also another issue that we have to face is to understand how to associate these losses to the different hazards. So when we have a tropical cyclone, there are losses that are caused by wind, losses that are caused by rainfall, losses that are caused by waves. So, and to calibrate and validate our model, it's important to understand what is the contribution of each hazard to the total value of the losses. Also, timing is a challenge for some of the uses that we do of this data. There are data that are produced immediately after the event, some that months after or years after. And so this is critical for us, especially for validation right after an event. And clearly having estimates shortly after the event for us is very important. So to have, assess the performance of our model, of our product, and based on that, future upgrade and improvements if necessary. Also, the methodology that is used to assess the losses after an event is not always clear. Sometimes that is based on claim, sometimes it's modeled. There are different assumptions. So these also represent a challenge because it's not always easy to compare the different information that we get from different sources. And so what would make lives easier in this context, in this topic? So this is just one simple slide, but they can be represented can be summarized with one single word, that is disaggregation. So for us is very important when we get the data on loss from events to have information on disaggregation, by hazard. So what is the hazard that caused these losses, the spatial disaggregation, disaggregation by occupancy type, by loss type. So I think that disaggregation is the word that can actually summarize the main information that we would like to have when we collect this data, and so that we can really tailor our model and our indices to be effective and to well represent the impact of the events. And so just to conclude, we have seen that loss estimates are critical in parametric insurance to define the triggering levels and to calibrate and to validate our risk models. And better and quickly available loss estimates allow to reduce basis risk, so which is the risk to underestimate or overestimate the impact of the event. And this means that this increases the robustness of our products and makes these products more effective. And this translates in contributed to the strength and the resilience in the region. So having effective policy insurance products means actually to increase the resilience of the region. We have seen that there are important information about the type of losses that are considered, the perils, how the losses are distributed in the space and across different types of assets are often missing. And so what I think it would be useful for us is to identify standard methodology that can allow to estimate losses consistently, so that we can compare different sources, different events in different countries, and different type of event. Okay, so that's all for my presentation. I stop here, and I'm happy to take some questions there. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel, for this interesting presentation. We can take some questions. They have not been formulated in the chat for Gabriel, but meanwhile, I have a question, and this is, since you are very dependent on the quality of data, and you have already emphasized this regarding, in particular, loss estimates, you have quite up-to-date data on the hazard, but not perhaps on vulnerability. And how do you manage the issue that data comes from different countries? They are using different methods or approaches to collect data. Is there any approach to standardize and to improve the quality of data that are provided by the different countries?
Well, from our point of view, so we cannot improve the quality of the data that we get. We definitely have some approach to make them consistent, and for example, to update and trend them to the current, to the present. Sometimes we have usually losses from the past that are based on past currency values, so we need to trend them to update them to the current year, to the present. And we also use, we are forced in this way to, and that is a good thing, to base our model on our knowledge of the physical process and on knowledge on the characteristic of the asset. So to have a loss estimate that is as much accurate as possible and that matches as much as possible the data that we found, even though there are some these inconsistencies that you mentioned and differences that we get from different sources that I would say cannot be really overcome from our side. So we need to take them as they are and interpret them based on what we can do and the information that we can obtain.
Following this, are you working with authorities in the different countries regarding insurance or insurance companies in these countries, or with the statistical offices in order to standardize and improve the methodologies for data collection?
So we do have a relation with local offices in the region. We are currently actually not working on this specific topic. It's something that we would like to do, and we would like to plan for the future also, so provide our experience and our knowledge of the topic. And we mainly work with local institutions, as you said, for the hazards, or with Met offices. But I think that we should actually improve the collaboration for this specific topic for loss estimate. That's something that we aim at.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabriel. Our time is over already, so we have to move on to the next presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Our third speaker brings a vital academic perspective to today's session. Professor Ilan Kelman is Professor of Disasters and Health at University College London, as well as the Arctic University of Norway. And his overall research interest is linking disasters and health, integrating climate change into both. He'll be speaking today, if I understand well, without any slide, about challenges in disaster death statistics. Thank you, Ilan. You can start your presentation.
Very kind. Thank you, muchas gracias. And a special thanks to Anna and Kanza for the organization and invitation. My contact details are in the chat. Please get in touch. And just exactly as was kindly said, I am not using slides, really just talking, and I will put notes and websites in the chat to emphasize certain points. Because the topic very much is challenges in disaster deaths statistics. Deaths are not always easy to count, which seems odd. A disaster happens, just total up the bodies and list their characteristics. Some concerns that emerge are operational in terms of not even knowing who died, even though it definitely helps for post-disaster needs assessments to know how many bodies there are, what percentage died, and the different characteristics. Two examples. So these are specific operational concerns. First, think back to the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. Some locations were just overwhelmed. They felt they had no choice but to dig mass graves and could not count the bodies. In one place in Thailand, they separated foreigners and locals, put the locals into mass graves, but kept the foreigner bodies aside for full identification. How did they differentiate foreigners and locals? Well, they looked at their face and they presumed that anyone who looked Thai was local. But how do you look Thai? And of course, people from many different races come from around the world. So even body counts can be racist. Second, not all bodies are recovered or can be recovered. During the collapse of the World Trade Center on the 11th of September 2001, many bodies were incinerated or crushed, with many remains still not formally identified. After tsunamis and other floods, many bodies are washed out to sea and they just disappear. Places with undocumented people, they might not be able to determine who was on site, who was missing, and so how many people died. How can we know what people need when they do not even know if their family members are alive or dead? These are operational, not statistics exactly. Even when bodies are available and are identified, it is not necessarily straightforward to understand all the statistics of what they represent. Two main confounders occur for overall disaster death statistics. First, we know that disasters are caused by vulnerabilities, not by hazards. Many compilations and analyses only differentiate disasters by hazards. Flood deaths work rarely references earthquake deaths work, and vice versa. So these silos, this separation by hazard, impedes vulnerability-based analyses to really understand who is dying in disasters and, most importantly, why. And this is very much why UNDRR has their No Natural Disasters campaign to avoid the phrase natural disaster, los desastres no son naturales, and also this idea in a book I wrote about people with power choosing disaster. The second confounder is that studies display different purposes and different methods, leading to different criteria for data, different fields when you're entering it into a spreadsheet, and sometimes even different data or different interpretations for the same data, which means that comparative analyses are not always easy. So we have the operational concerns and we have the confounders. Three factors, three challenges cluster in order to inhibit disaster death statistics. Challenge one is a definition of disaster. If 15 solo snowmobilers perish in 15 different avalanches, is that 15 disasters? If 3 families of 5 people each die in the same avalanche, then usually it is called a disaster. The definition of disaster affects which deaths are considered when we total avalanche disaster deaths compared to only avalanche deaths. We heard about, for example, EMDAT, and that is the most commonly used disaster database, and it is the most comprehensive. Look at the definition of disaster used by EMDAT and its categories. The data are not adequate for analyzing disaster deaths. One example is consistently defining the start and stop times for disasters. Lahars on Mount Pinatubo continued killing more than a decade after that volcano's May 1991 eruption. So is it all one disaster? Or are they each separate disasters? Aggregating and disaggregating disasters by geographical area can be arbitrary. A hurricane can kill in many countries. Some say it is one disaster. Some say it is one disaster per country, and so many disasters. And even hazard classifications can be complicated. Cyclones are called windstorms. Most deaths are from drowning. Earthquake-induced landslide deaths have been labeled as both earthquake deaths and as landslide deaths. Tsunami deaths are sometimes compiled in one tsunami category and sometimes are separated according to the cause of the tsunami. Definitions are complicated. The second challenge relates to which data to use for the statistics. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, 2 pregnant evacuees died in Houston. The medical examiner there counted those as 4 Hurricane Katrina deaths, 2 women and 2 babies, 2 fetuses. It is a political choice, which changes depending on location, about whether a fetus is a separate disaster death from the mother or not. Disaster death totals vary about including or not including homicides, and suicides as part of disaster-related deaths? And how long after a disaster should they be included? People have died from physical and mental health conditions years after the disaster was said to have stopped. Should we update the data to include those deaths? Some storm deaths include traffic crashes. Others do not label the traffic crashes as being part of the storm. After Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Rita the same year led to a massive evacuation, and the vast majority of the dozens of deaths were heat-related when people were stalled on the roads during the evacuation. Deaths can be prevented during a disaster. Fewer traffic crashes if people stay indoors during a blizzard. During the horrific mortality of COVID-19, death due to air pollution and traffic crashes declined substantially. Should we subtract the lives saved from the lives lost? Think about identity discussions. Who chooses the statistics and the categories for sex, gender, race, ethnicity, caste, and many others? How would we know how each fatality would identify themselves? Who makes those decisions, and which data should be reported? Even if we agree on the data and the categories, what analysis method do we use for the data? This is the third and final cluster, because the analysis method can change the conclusion. Excess death calculations do an amazing job of providing deep understandings of absolute and proportional death statistics for many disasters, especially temperature extremes and disease outbreaks. And our colleagues from the UK, I use their excess data calculations all the time. So thank you, Anna, Kanza, and your colleagues. But they are estimates based on models with error bars, and they're perfectly legitimate for that. I could not do better. They really are world leading. Different techniques exist for calculating proportional and absolute excess deaths within a geographic area over a geographic time frame. And we see this especially when people try to say how many disaster deaths we can link to human-caused climate change. To make that link from us changing the climate to a disaster to disaster deaths, we have to make so many assumptions about vulnerabilities, and it is not easy to defend the final result, although we need to continue working on the science to improve. In fact, disaster death statistics add a layer of difficulty when looking at overall death rates in a country, in a city, in the world. Particularly proportional mortality, not just the number of deaths, referring to absolute mortality. Proportional mortality is important within different categories of people in order to understand who is dying more, who is dying less, and especially why. This means that we need to know everyone's identifying characteristics. We need to know everyone's complete vulnerability profile, not just the characteristics of the fatalities. And of course, this challenge presumed that we could collect the data we need, because there are many impediments to data collection. We also have to think about comprehensiveness, accuracy, and precision of our data. These three are different, and it is not easy to achieve them all. How ethical is it to push for improved data? Some data might not be collectible or morally should not be collected. Collecting to the level of detail we want should never displace caring for survivors and bereaved. There should not be a trade-off. There might sometimes be one. And certainly collecting some data after the immediate emergency phase might be difficult because full formal death records are not available. It's just too late. Treating bodies and bereaved with respect might preclude collecting some desired data. Drunk drivers are implicated in many flood deaths in vehicles. Would we ask a parent if we could do a blood alcohol test on their dead child? We do not need this data to say that do not drive drunk. We do not need this data to say that alcohol and floodwater do not mix. Paramount is grieving rather than perfect data, which is not always how politics operates. Body counts are inflated for political reasons to attract help, and body counts are reduced for political reasons to avoid outside attention and intervention or to minimize compensation. During COVID-19, the UK used two different definitions of a death by COVID-19. Both were likely to inflate the number of deaths. Other countries use different definitions, yet we still see people comparing COVID-19 deaths by country when the baseline is different. So what next? Well, basically, accept and admit the challenges of disaster death statistics. This does not mean stopping our work. We have to try our best. Consistency might not be achievable or desirable, so post-disaster needs assessments must incorporate these challenges while serving affected people. Numbers and categories are political in these statistics. We must still do the best that we can within the impacts of disaster deaths, not despite this political reality, but because of it, to ensure that we can always do our best to avoid disasters, as per the link in the chat, and always doing better to understand the statistics of disaster deaths. Thank you. Otra vez, muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Ilan. Gracias. Thank you for this interesting insight about death statistics. And I'd like to encourage the audience to formulate questions for the session in the end to ask Ilan about some of these issues. Thank you. Now we move to our final speaker today, who will be introducing the new Delta resilience, that stands for disaster and hazardous events, losses and damages tracking and analysis. Iria Touzon Calle is a program management officer at the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, Risk Knowledge Branch, Bonn office, based in Germany, where she leads efforts on the Delta resilience, which was formerly the Disaster Tracking System, or DTS, working through UNDRR's regional offices and partnerships to deliver country support to enhance production and use of losses and damages data. Iria will talk us through his new and important tool to monitor the impact of disasters. Thank you, Iria. Please share your presentation.
Hello again. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Buenos días, buenas tardes. Just confirming that you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can.
Oh, perfect. Thanks again. It's a great honor to be part of this discussion and to share with you some of the toolkit that we've been working to support countries to strengthen their capacities and to institutionalize their system to address some of the challenges that were presented earlier, especially from the side of the producers, but also on the side of the users of this data and the different applications. So if I can move the slides. Yeah. Sorry, just a challenge and moving my slides ahead. Okay, hopefully it works now. Okay, yes. So I just will give you a quick overview on what is the Delta Resilience System and what it does encompass. And where we come from is really from a system that has been supported over decades, that was born in Latin America with many of academic and technical expertise from your region, and that has been supported and used by over 113 countries to establish and maintain some national disaggregated disaster losses and damage database. As of now, there are country instances, but there is also a documentation diversion maintained by UNDRR, which allows countries to keep disaster by disaster event records at a very subnational disaggregated level, with a homogeneous data model, but also expandable with additional region-specific extensions and region-specific variables that were relevant. And that since 2017 was aligned to better support on the data aggregation that then is used and required for the Sendai framework reporting to report progress against the global agreed targets on the Sendai framework related to indicators related to losses from A, B, C, and D, in terms of mortality, in terms of people affected, in terms of economic losses and disruption and damage to infrastructure. So the rationale of why we had invested and we had worked with many of the country representative stakeholders, data user and producer to strengthen this assistance system is the need to really support additional application and use cases, some of them that were presented very nicely by our colleagues from the Caribbean Catastrophic Insurance Facility, for example, look at financing. So how we can improve the data quality that is required to be have more performant models that allow better target products, more efficient to address the needs and to support financing needs. But also in terms of other applications that were explored through a very comprehensive analysis of the current applications and the emerging use cases and how we could better support them, which data enhancements will allow for supporting those applications. So for example, we look at early warning system and impact-based forecasting and early action, how more disaggregated data, more hazard disaggregated, but also more sector disaggregated or asset level disaggregated data could better support better identification of what are the best actions to mitigate potential impacts, but also looking at how this data can also be used for benchmarking success and monitoring progress, for example, on loss and damage frameworks, on adaptation, and for sure in disaster risk reduction. So that's the starting point of why we have invested in enhancing these systems. And when we look at what does this system encompass, we want to avoid the perception that this is just one additional software piece that is out there, is underpinned by a certain amount of other components that are essential, and at the center are those applications, but does encompass data standards and assessment methodologies that are essential to really understand what is counted, as some colleagues were outlining before. What is counted, how is it counted, and how even what we think is so straightforward and evident, like counting dead bodies, it doesn't, as I very nicely explained. So what are the different standards, including from hazard classification, but also what are the needs for countries to be able to better collect this data, to better manage it, and to better use it. And that also comes through a comprehensive system of partnerships, looking at where there are gaps and how this could be advanced in terms of methodologies for assessment. For example, when we look on non-economic losses, around culture, around biodiversity, ecosystem services, where there are losses related to, where there are gaps related to assessing slow onset events and this temporal aspect that were referred by colleagues, when there are a specific capacity challenge on technical assistance requirements from some countries with less capacity to to have across sector like this regular data collection, or to have at the granular level granularity that is required, as was presented nicely by Giselle in the case of the St. Vincent and Grenadines. So looking at all these elements, we look at strengthening all of them, including on the software and the toolkit that is offered for member states to establish and to use it as the basis of the technological solution for institutionalizing losses and damage tracking system. We look at the whole data ecosystem, and there are some tools I will explain later on that part of the toolkit on ensuring there's a comprehensive analysis of the data ecosystem. And what the data model of this data system encompass is really expanded from the Cimentar system that was looking at collecting information on what happened, on the effects, on the observed impacts, and also linked that and expanded that data value chain to collect in a linked manner the hazardous event information, that more of a technical information of the physical phenomena, those parameters of magnitude, intensity, the track of a cyclone, the evolution, different intensity, the footprints of a specific hazardous event, whether it's the ashes of the volcano, the peak ground acceleration, and other very technical parameters that were traditionally collected and stored in separate databases from the information that is on the observed impact. So the system, the Delta resilience, allowed to record simultaneously that information and to help technical institutions to establish those linkages for then supporting better forensic analysis later on. And then the possibilities as well is this system is to connect that baseline information, that reference information on vulnerability, on exposure, that baseline information that is often missing, as Giselle was explaining, to be able to better understand what does it mean. So what does it mean that 4,000 people were displaced? Well, it might be massive if we look at the population of that specific island, or if we look at the capacity in the sheltering or housing capacity. So that information, that baseline information, allowed to compare the changes pre and post disaster, but also to put in context the loss and damage to be able to understand impacts. And then a whole set of different outputs that can be produced as a result of the analytics. For now, we have available 3 dashboards that I will explain later on. But the whole approach for the UN partners that are behind this initiative, which is UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, but in core partnership with UNDP, as well as the World Meteorological Organization, and many others that had contributed for specific sectorial methodologies or modules, is really to provide a whole package of support and technical assistance, including from migration from any legacy system, especially the Cimentar structured data, and providing assistance to strengthen ecosystems for the data production and later on from the application as well, but with the application at the core of the rationale for producing better data, and looking at providing support in terms of capacity development to better utilize methodological frameworks, to document them, and to be clear on the metadata and all those elements that enhance the quality of the data and the applications, and all starting with overall approach for data ecosystem maturity assessment, which we have developed with some partners that look at the people and process and technology and help countries self-assess where they are in terms of the maturity levels, and then identify actions and pathways to strengthen, whether it's around the methodologies, whether it's around the technology, the solution, or what. And that's a comprehensive approach on supporting countries. And those some of the elements that are looked at the data ecosystem maturity assessment. So it's really not looking on the infrastructure and the technology side that can be very advanced in some countries, but also looking at the policies and the actors, or the role and the relationships, the skills, but also the overall ecosystem governance, communication, strategies, collaboration, and the data supply, the value chain from the data supply to the data demand, and how those are well connected, demand to supply. from there is really supporting countries on whether where are their enables that could help them advance in their system, and whether there are specific needs, whether it's around the technology, or whether it's around supporting in institutionalizing and ensuring sustainability of efforts that is not only a one-time off after one specific event, but having the capacities, as Giselle was referring to, have more in-house capacity to conduct assessment and not always depend on external support and consultants and others. So I will not go into the details of the system, but more information is available in our website on how does it look like. Is meant as a tool for governments, even it's an open source software that anyone could download. When the beta version is publicly released, for now it's available upon request for governments, and the idea is that will support governments on establishing institutionalizing systems that help them produce official data and statistics. And the core models that are available in this beta version refer to the data entry and has these key components on the hazardous event and the disaster event that can be connected through these linkage parameters. So that's just showcasing how this linkage parameter can be established to specific link to specific hazardous event or to other disaster event to record cascades. And the possibilities of collecting information about the spatial footprint, sector disaggregation, and information and some support to costing some of the damage and losses, but also some basic, for now, visualization tools to be able to do queries and to visualize the data per hazard, with the focus is how droughts had affected different sectors or different islands, how sector specific had been affected by what type of hazardous event. Agriculture is about droughts, it's about sun and desert storm, what has affected agriculture sector, agriculture asset and production, or if the focus is around a specific disaster event, we want to have a comprehensive picture and visualize to certain preset and pre-configure graphics, maps, and others. So that's a snapshot what the tool encompasses and the overall whole system. And for sure, we will be happy to provide more details as per questions come in, or I will also put them in the chat, my contact information. Thank you very much, and back to you, Urbano.
Well, thank you, Ilia, and thank you to all our speakers for these innovations and also fascinating insights from a diverse range of perspectives. It is now over to you and to the audience to formulate any questions you have for the speakers today. We have not received any so far in the chat, but I'd like to encourage you to do so. In the meanwhile, I can formulate one question to Giselle. Giselle, you have identified several challenges regarding the elaboration of PDNAs, and my question is, taking into account these multiple challenges, which are the priorities in terms of statistics, or who can lead the collection, for example, of baseline data that you have identified as a critical barrier? Giselle, you're muted. Oh, now it's okay. Since Giselle is not responding, there is a question for Professor Kalman by Alexis Athens. Alexis says that you mentioned that disaster death counts in MDAT aren't adequate. What do you think could be some of the solutions in standardizing death counts, especially thinking about the draft global disaster-related statistic framework and the efforts for further international standardization?
No, absolutely. That is the question. And I think actually, Alexis, you may be able to answer it better than me. Number one, is think about other systems. And in fact, we just heard about Desinventar, which uses a slightly different method and has many advantages. Can we expand that to all countries? The second option is use different definitions and then compare. So it's not necessarily a question of saying, well, MDAT's definition is arbitrary, so ignore it. No, I mean, of course not. But given that MDAT starts at 10 deaths, well, let's try 9 deaths, and 5 deaths, and even 1 death, and 20 deaths, and 50 deaths, and 100 deaths, and actually just see what difference it does make. Because it could be the data and analyses are different, but the conclusions are similar. Or if the conclusions are completely different, then yes, we do have to question MDAT. Because ultimately, we have to ask ourselves, how consistent do we want disaster statistics? How will improved consistency actually help us? And it does come back to comprehensiveness, accuracy, and precision. But again, I emphasize, Alexis, I think you might be able to offer so much more than I can. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ilang. Giselle, are you there to answer the question formulated before? If not, there is a question that is being formulated to all the participants in terms of what are the suggestions to improve data collection? What kind of strategies can be adopted? Does any one of you wish to respond to this?
I mean, yeah, I can jump in. And again, it's very similar. Define groups in different ways and see what difference that makes for the outcome and analysis. We might not be able to reach consistency. We might not want consistency. Try the analyses with different groupings. Try the same groupings with different analyses to try to understand what difference our choices make in the conclusions.
Ilya, would you like to add something to this question?
Thanks, Urbano. Yes, I think it's a complex challenge, right? To record multi-hazard, but I think allowing a possibility of different scenarios to be recorded, like if we are as you were saying, for example, different assumptions, if we are assuming like a recovery a period on specific timing versus a longer timing, and allowing and documenting these different assumptions will be helpful to be able to have a more consistent data set. And I see, if I may jump in, I see there's another question from Esther directed to me, and I'm very happy to take that question. So yes, our intention is that the Delta Resilience, that is the rebranding of the DTS disaster tracking system, will replace or build off this inventory, but is not compulsory that anyone will have to replace at a specific time. You know, this inventory has been open source software that anyone could install and utilize. And the main difference is that in the data model, as I was trying to explain, it allows to record and link the hazardous event information with the impact information. In this inventory, you have very little detail around the hazardous event, maybe the type of hazardous event, if it was an earthquake, was a flood, and also maybe send a field related to magnitude, if not something else is recorded into the comments field, but not a structured approach to record more additional technical parameters that traditionally technical entities like hydrometeorological services or geological surveys do record about the hazardous event, including footprints and others. So that's a key difference, because then allows you to also link, and that's a difficult process for sure, but we might have a overall process, institutional and technical process to decide like how we can assign a specific impact to a specific hazardous event recorded, and how this linkage is recorded into the database. Although the whole attribution analysis is not supported by the system, that will be requiring much more research and forensic analysis to happen. But this is a key difference. And then there is an enhancement in terms of the hazard classification approach. For sure, in the Decimentar, it was an older pre-classification that was used, and then much more open for users to introduce new hazards if they couldn't find, or if they thought they couldn't find what they were looking for. And this more standardization in the hazard classification will be supported definitely by the hazard information profiles were presented yesterday by Virginia. I hope it answers, but happy to take offline additional questions on that.
Thank you, Iria. Giselle, maybe you have, she has been experiencing some problems with the sound. Maybe now is
Hello?
able to communicate. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, can you just repeat the last part of the question? I think
Yeah,
I missed it.
Yeah, certainly. My question was, since you have identified multiple challenges for data collection to elaborate PDNAs, which are the priorities in terms of producing the statistics, taking into account these multiple barriers or challenges? And also, who could lead the collection of baseline data that is needed for this, the elaboration of these PDNAs?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. I did highlight that data is an issue. It is one of the most significant challenges, and I would prioritize data to feed into the PDNA to be top priority. A reason being, the PDNA has to be grounded not only in conversation, but also in data. The best placed agency for the collection of data, I would say, would be the National Statistical Office of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That is a department within the Ministry of Finance, Economic Planning and Information Technology. They are the custodian of data, but they're not the only collector or producer of data. Data is also collected at different agencies, different departments of government, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Custom and Excise Department, Inland Revenue. There are administrative data that lies different places. There is also the National Emergency Management Office that collects data with respect to, disasters. There is the department that deals with social programs. That is the department, the Ministry of National Mobilization, Gender, etc. So I would say the best place agency would be the National Statistical Office. However, what we need to establish are protocols with respect to producing, gathering, and sharing of data. So this platform will sort of, encourage or foster interagency collaboration among government agencies and local authorities, and even the private sector to share relevant data. So we have done an assessment of our national statistical system about 3 years ago. And we realized that one of the most important activity that needs to be done will be to, review our National Statistical Act, which will provide some way of putting more emphasis with regards to sharing data and collection of data. So we need some formal agreement, that will outline how we share data, what are the responsibilities of different agencies, and what are the protocols and guidelines for sharing. So, we can access that data when it needs to be accessed, and we can be able to use it to inform our policies, etc.
Thank you, Giselle. We are running out of time. There is a pending question formulated by Caroline Sales regarding an issue that we have not been discussing in these sessions, particularly the multi-hazard dimension of extreme events and how to collect data on those events. If any one of you has a rapid response to this question, this is very welcomed. Otherwise, we have to move on to closing the event. Does any one of you have some brief comments on this?
I will just say we need to consider multi-vulnerabilidad, not just multi-peligro y multi-riesgo, to focus again also on that question from Ghana, focus on how people experience disasters, the highly localized and small impacts, and recognize that our disaster statistics should explain and understand vulnerabilities, not just peligros y riesgos. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Ilan, and thank you, Giselle. Thank you, Iria, for having your presentations today, as well as Gabriel, who has already left. And we have to bring this session on disaster impact statistics to a close. So thank you once again to each of the speakers for sharing their insights and expertise, and to all of you for your engagement. We look forward to continuing these important conversations in the future. And now we will have a 10-minute break before the next session begins at 10:35 a.m. in Chile on strengthening measurement for risk reduction. Thank you so much and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Giselle.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Of the Global Expert Forum. So this forum, this session is organized by the Economic and Social Commission for West Asia, Economic Commission for Europe, and Economic Commission for Africa, as well as UNDRR. And the topic of the session is to strengthening measurement for disaster risk reduction. And today we have the privilege to have our moderator, Mr. Hakan Yazıcıoğlu, who will lead us through this exciting session of today. Mr. Yazıcıoğlu is the head of Data Dissemination and Communication Department at the Turkish Statistical Institute. So without further ado, Hakan, you have the floor. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Can you confirm if you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Hakan Yazıcıoğlu, and I am head of the Data Dissemination and Communication Department at Turkstat. I would like to warmly welcome everyone to session 4 of the 5th Global Expert Forum for producers and users of disaster-related statistics. Actually, I would like to thank Mr. Chuan from UNDRR, Mr. Michael Nagy from UNEC, and Ms. Wafa Abul Husn from ESCLA for their excellent organization and making this session happen. In this session, we will focus on exploring ways to strengthen the measurement of disaster risk make better and informed DRR policies and practices via disaster-related statistics. Generating and making sense of non-event specific disaster statistics such as exposure, vulnerability, coping capacity is not always easy. It requires baseline setting and multi-sectoral collaborative approach. We will hear some exciting presentations today from a diverse background of speakers from the DRR and statistical community, including national and international experience in generating disaster risk statistics and information. And we welcome the interaction between our speakers and panelists with the audience to share and exchange on best practices, challenges, and innovations in integrating risk statistics into decision making. Before beginning, I would like to remind you some housekeeping rules. The session is simultaneously interpreted into Spanish and English. Speakers and audiences are welcome to deliver their intervention and question in either of the two languages. During the session, we invite all participants to actively engage. We recommend using the chat function to post your questions at any time. Please kindly write the name of the presenter who you want to direct your question. We will collect them and try to reply. And if time allows, some of you may also take the floor to expand your points. We remind you again to each speakers, please respect and follow the time that was assigned to you. Today we will have two blocks of presentations today. In the first part, we will hear from Dr. Sabrina Yuran from UNFPA and Dr. Maria Salgado Galvez from UNDRR and Mr. Ayman Omer from FAO. And in the second part, countries and organizations will make their presentation. We will host Ms. Naira Mandalyan, Statistical Committee of the Republic of Armenia, Mr. Felipe Ibarra, National Service for Disaster Prevention and Response from Chile, Ms. Luisa Liambo from Namibia Statistics Agency, and Dr. Aaron Gardner from Lloyd's Register Foundation. Before we begin, we would love to hear from you. We have a quick poll to make our session more interactive. Please take a moment to join our Slido poll. You can simply scan the QR code on the screen. And the question here is, what are the key actions we can take to collect better exposure, vulnerable, and coping capacity data to help reduce disaster risk? So your responses will appear as a word cloud, and I will share and discuss the results with you at the end of the session. Now, in the first half of our session, we will hear two projects. The first one, UN Population Fund Latin America and the Caribbean Regional Office, and UNDRR Regional Office for the Americas and the Caribbean region. They have recently published a report on using demographic data to map hazard risk. We invite Dr. Sabrina Yuran, UNFPA, and Dr. Maria Salgado Galvez from UNDRR to present on the demographic intelligence mapping multi-hazard exposure of population in Latin America and the Caribbean titled presentation. Dr. Sabrina is a development sociologist with more than 15 years of international in the areas of population and development data and policy. Dr. Mario is a program management officer in UNDRR with over 15 years of experience in the development of catastrophe risk models and coordination of international disaster risk management projects in Latin America and Caribbean. Now the floor is yours, Dr. Sabrina and Dr. Maria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hakan, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And we are also very excited to have the opportunity to present the results of this joint collaboration between UNFPA and UNDRR that has as an overall objective the improvement of risk knowledge to better inform policy making in the region. So we are going to do a joint presentation with Dr. Sabrina Duran from UNFPA. I will do the first slides and then I will give the floor to her. So next slide, please. So why is this work relevant? Because first of all, this region, Latin America and the Caribbean, is exposed to different types of hazards, and it's also having a dynamic change in terms of exposure growing, mostly because of large urbanization rates, but also some changes in the dynamic of certain type of hazards, particularly climate hazards, since there are factors that have to do with environmental degradation and climate change that have modified either their intensity or the occurrence patterns. So this is, to the best of our knowledge, the first regional and consistent analysis that aims to estimate the population exposure to different types of hazards across the whole region. And for this, we have identified not only the number of people, but also the disaggregation of those exposed people into different categories, as will be shown later. Next slide, please. So why is it important, in our view, to do this type of analysis? Because it's critical to improve the risk understanding, and for this, it is very relevant to quantify disaster risk. First of all, to decide, we must first measure, and it is not possible to plan or implement sustainable strategies related to disaster risk reduction if we don't have a clear understanding of which is the baseline and which are the expected results of the implementation of one or more measures. Also, we have used a prospective and a probabilistic approach for doing this exposure mapping, considering that historical information is useful and is very much needed for the development of all these models, but because many of these events, particularly extreme events such as large magnitude earthquakes or high category hurricanes, tend to occur within relatively long time spans, the historical information by itself is not able to provide a complete picture of disaster risk, and therefore that incomplete information is not robust enough to support decision-making processes. And the other challenge that we envisage and that motivated us to start working on this is the lack of disaggregated risk metrics in terms of the population, because usually this is an area that is overlooked in the disaster risk assessment. Most of them have tended to focus only on the physical dimension, I mean on the damage on infrastructure, on the damage on housing, etc., but not necessarily on the population itself, and more importantly, how the disaggregated results are understood and communicated. Next slide, please. So for this, we would like to highlight the so-called risk equation. And for this, it's good to understand that risk is a function of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. And we have to be very clear on what has been the scope of this analysis, in the sense that so far we have only looked at two components of the risk equation, namely hazard and exposure. Then this is not a full risk assessment. We are aiming to improve and to continue this joint collaboration by explicitly considering the vulnerability component so that we can move into more concrete risk metrics. However, this multi-hazard exposure mapping is very relevant and has been well received by different partners and stakeholders in the region. Next slide, please. Next one. So in terms of the hazard inputs, that's something that we provided from UNDRR. Since 2013, UNDRR has started working on the development of probabilistic hazard and risk models. And the last release of this type of efforts was made in 2017 in the context of the Global Assessment Report Atlas, the GAR Atlas, on which a global level multi-hazard risk assessment was carried out following a probabilistic approach. Of course, because of the global level, this is a coarse-grained analysis that is most intended to raise awareness and to invite different stakeholders into developing more detailed analysis rather than to explicitly inform decision making. But however, for this type of collaboration and for the results that we are presenting next, we believe that it has the sufficient level of detail that can raise the conversation. So for this, as I mentioned, this was a multi-hazard risk assessment on which different perils were considered, such as earthquakes, river and floods, tsunami, volcanic eruptions, and hurricanes. Specifically, and because of the regional coverage and the regional relevance, we have made this multi-hazard exposure mapping for 3 hazards: earthquake, hurricanes, and vulnerability. So this is the introduction and an overview of what was obtained from the information available from UNDRR. And now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Sabrina Duran for the rest of the presentation, including the methodology and the results. So Sabrina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mario, and greetings to all participants. As Mario mentioned, I will present the methods that we applied and some of the first results. So as you mentioned, we set out to quantify the population exposed to natural disasters in Latin America and the Caribbean. And for that, we used the framework of exposure, of hazard exposure and vulnerability. And so in this first phase, because by now we also already moved on to the second phase, we really focused on hazard exposure components, where people live in relation to earthquake zones, floodplains, and hurricane paths. And so what we did is we overlaid the probabilistic hazard models from UNDRR with the latest gridded population estimates from our colleagues at WorldBob, and we disaggregated the data that are disaggregated by sex and age. And then we used thresholds based on structural risks. We applied thresholds such as wind speeds of about 178 kilometers an hour, floods over 0.5 meters, and we identified then how many people live within medium or within high risks areas. If we move to the second slide, we can show some of those results, because some of those results are really striking. Overall, what we have found is that exposure to major natural hazards in Latin America and the Caribbean is not a marginal issue, because it affects 268 million individuals, and that is only almost 4 in 10 individuals in our regions. Now, if we break that down into the key hazards that I mentioned before, one of the key findings in terms of earthquake exposure is that it hits 125 million people, and that is nearly 1 in 5, nearly 19%, live in areas that are exposed to medium or high seismic hazards. And these areas are defined based on scientifically established thresholds for ground acceleration, and that is widely used in regional building codes, for example. And so we're not just talking about theoretical low-level shaking. We are talking about meaningful seismic risk with the potential to cause substantial damage to homes, infrastructure, and also to lives. On the next slide, we're showing some of the results for hurricane winds. Our analysis shows that it's 15.4% of the region's population. That's about 100 million people that live in areas that are exposed to strong hurricane winds. And as I mentioned before, these are hurricane winds that are above 178 kilometers per hour. That is a category 3 hurricane on the scale. And what that tells us is that a significant proportion of the population lives in places where hurricanes are not only possible, but where they are highly probable. And these winds can cause, again, extensive damage to our infrastructure. They can disrupt essential services, they can displace communities, and we are facing that year-round, heightening throughout the northern hemisphere summer months. But this is a constant hazard, of course. Now, again, many of those high exposure zones, they are also in coastal and low-lying areas where urban growth continues. And oftentimes in that urban growth planning, we do not necessarily see the adequate building standards, the planning regulations that we would need to see to address these these hazard exposures from the very beginning. The next slide shows that we have identified 64 million individuals, almost 10% of the regional population, that is exposed to medium or high flooding, riverine flood risks. And that includes areas where floodwaters are likely to reach at least half a meter in depth. And that is, again, enough to damage infrastructure, to disrupt transportation and sanitation, and really also to endanger lives. And while this percentage may seem somewhat lower than the earthquake or the hurricane percentages, it still represents millions of people, 64 million of people in our regions, many of whom live in densely populated urban or peri-urban areas with very poor drainage systems and with limited resilience infrastructure. And so,
Sabrina, sorry to interrupt, but I see we have a few more slides, so may I kindly ask you to start wrapping up because we are approaching to our allocated time. Thank you.
No problem. Then let us just jump ahead a couple of slides. Let's go to the next map because I think one of the, let's jump to that one, yes. Because I think one of the key findings that we wanted to show is the significant overlap of hazards. It's not just one or the other, it is an intersection of hazards that come and then compound exposure that makes disaster planning much more complex and much more resource intensive. You see that in some of the countries, Guatemala, for example, it is 97% exposure to earthquakes. There's also 9% exposure of flooding risks. In Dominica, the entire population is exposed to earthquakes and hurricanes alike. So we really need to see those issues from a compound exposure perspective. Next slide, and I'm wrapping up. So what we wanted to see is, does that mean, what does it look like by sex and age? Is there a variable in terms of demographic component? What we do say is that the exposure levels were consistent across groups. What it does tell us is that it is more settlement patterns that are driving exposure. Everyone is living in the same high-risk areas. But of course now, and I think that's a point, and with that point I can also close, is that again, we focused on exposure. So many people in that same area have that same level of exposure. Now, what varies dramatically is, of course, vulnerability, because individual factors of vulnerability, intersecting vulnerability of those individuals, of course, then really tell us the entire story of who is most at risk and who is most vulnerable. Because we do know, for example, that older persons face different mobility or health constraints. We do know that women often take on care responsibilities during emergencies, and that, of course, exposes them differently as well. We also know that poverty and disability can sharply increase disaster impact. And so exposure was our first work to really see what is the population, quantifying the population. The next step that we have now already embarked upon, and we're doing piloting work in El Salvador and in Cuba together, UNFPA and UNDRR, is to really fully understand the vulnerability of the individuals within those areas, using the census data, the most recent census data from those countries, to really understand at the individual level, what is the vulnerability to hazards in our region. And with that, I close. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabrina and Dr. Maria, for the insightful presentation. What we have just seen is the, I think, analysis of how populations across Latin America and the Caribbean are exposed to multiple hazards, affecting more than millions of people. So we understand that the exposure alone does not define risk, but vulnerability does. Factors like poverty, informality, and unequal access to services determine who is most affected. Thank you so much. Now we are moving to the second presentation. Mr. Ayman Omer will share his presentation, the FAO project in the Near East and North American region to reduce drought risk. Mr. Ayman Omer is the Senior Field Program Officer and Delivery Manager of regional priority for building resilience to multiple shocks at the FAO Regional Office for the Near East and North Africa. He has over 25 years of experience in international development in 22 countries in the Middle East and Africa. And before he served as senior program officer and delivery manager for regional initiative on building resilience at FAO. Now the floor is yours, Mr. Ayman. Thank you.
Hello, colleagues. And just to confirm, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to present something from the Near East and North Africa region, and this is a region that extends from Mauritania in the Sahel region of Africa, the whole of the Maghreb country, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, North Africa, and then some part of Asia, which is like, the Middle East, and that is what is the Arab region. I'm based with the FAO regional office here in Cairo, and this region we consider it is structurally vulnerable to disasters for different region. It is the reasons. It's the most water is scarce. The average of water availability is less than 10% of the global average. Availability of arable land is an issue. It is the highest in terms of population growth, and most importantly, it's a region that most affected by conflicts. Recently, we mapped the hazards related to the agriculture, and mainly here the focus of the presentation is on agriculture sector. And in terms of events, floods by far is the most significant hazard in the region, while in terms of impact, drought is the most. And here we look into the impact in terms of not only in terms of the agriculture sector, but across all different sectors. The region is constructed of 4 sub-regions, and here you can see the difference mapping of hazards in the sub-regions. But again, it is confirming the conflict, and it's confirming climate-related hazards of different types. Coming to the agriculture, agriculture is one of the most impactful sector by different disasters, especially natural disasters. The total loss is around 3.8 trillion over a number of years. That is giving us around 123 billion a year, 5% of the global agriculture GDP, almost. Drought is by far the most significant in terms of its impact on the sector, given the vulnerability of the sector itself to climatic factor, like the soil type, the rainfall, and others. And of course, within the agri-food system, rain-fed agriculture is the most susceptible to the impact of different disasters. Within the region here, and this is the data from 2015 to 2023, which is from 10 countries that is reported damage and loss, we see that the agriculture sector is sharing around 54% of the total losses of disaster during this period. Countries like Palestine and Algeria, it constitute a considerable percentage in there. What we do as FAO here, especially in terms of disaster-related statistics, is capacity building to countries, mainly to government institution mandated with statistics. We do have a regional agriculture hazard monitoring dashboard, and that is a living document and living platform showing the major agricultural hazards and how they evolve, knowledge product. And the last one, data and emergency, that is like global project that FAO is focusing on, and I will share with more details about that within the allocated time for this presentation. The data and emergency covered 27 countries, is mainly focusing on what are the key impact of shock on agriculture sector, why those impacts are happening, who are the most affected, and when are their greatest need in terms of the agricultural season, and even going down to try to put a price tag on the losses and damages from these different hazards and risk. It focuses on two pillars: monitoring and impact. And the monitoring here this is a regular process, collecting information from household and from input trader 4 times a year from these 27 countries, that allow us establish some sort of a longitudinal data from 2020 up to now, while the impact is mainly focusing on the assessment to understand the impact of large scale hazards on the sector. In terms of the monitoring, this is analytical framework. It is mainly the impact pathway between shocks, agricultural livelihood and food security. It looks into livelihood stress phases within the different actors within the agri-food systems. And it go back in terms of looking at before and after different shocks. It has an element of spatial patterns and trend analysis. Those are in what you can see here. This is example from Yemen. This is some of the recent indicators of Yemen that is dated June 2025, and that is some of the key indicators related to various area, like area under cropping, access to seeds, livestock prices, and others. And the system itself and the platform has a different way of presenting. So this is again the same indicators presenting in maps from the case of Yemen. While the impact, as I said, is looking at the long-term impact on a major disasters. And here, this is Libya flooding in Daraa a couple of years ago. And this is more of an impact assessment with a rigor methodology, looking at damages and loss in terms of affecting the agriculture sector. The same here, it is, for example, from Syria, that was a few years ago, where I found that, the damage on the sector by then was amounting to around 3.2 billion. This is from our work on the analytics and statistics here, and mainly here, this presentation might be slightly different from the rest in terms of we're not presenting methodologies, but we're talking about maybe one of the system that we have, and the main rationale from establishing such a system is mainly to inform decision making when it comes to the agriculture and agriculture sector. And here a couple of recommendations, which is what is working towards, which is strengthening the national damage and loss information and generating evidences for policy making in terms of. Thank you. This is all what I want to present, and looking forward to any questions or comments. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ayman, for your informative presentation. What we heard from Mr. Ayman today, that he introduced us the agricultural losses in the Near East and North African region and the importance for the countries, and he also showed us the exciting system for agriculture sector, the data in emergencies monitoring system. This system provides the regular time and granular data for the agricultural livelihoods increases and for countries. It indeed helps us to measure and track the impacts of disasters on the agriculture sector, and also support evidence-based policy making in this area. Thank you again, Mr. Ayman. If our audience has any question for Mr. Ayman, you can raise your hands or put your question on the chat box. I cannot see any for now, so let's move to the second half of our session. We will now have a panel of country and organizational perspectives with panelists from Armenia, Chile, Namibia, and the Lloyd's Register Foundation. Now, Ms. Naira Mandalyan from Armenia will make her presentation on disaster-related statistics in Armenia from national to local level. Please, Ms. Naira, share your presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Hakan, and thank you for this possibility and opportunity to produce some developments in Armstat. So I'll share my screen. My presentation will be from the country side, yes. And our journey reflects both the growing demand for disaster and climate data and the importance of strong collaboration between institutions to ensure that statistics can truly inform disaster risk reduction and resilience policies. The development of disaster-related statistics in Armenia has been supported by a number of international initiatives. Our cooperation with UNSD, UNEC, ESCAP, UNDRR, and EU also has been fundamental in aligning national methodologies with international standards. Through these collaborations, Armenia has started integrating disaster and climate-related indicators into its official statistical system and into the Armenian SDG platform. Let me begin with a short reminder of Armenia's context. Armenia is a small, landlocked, mountainous country in the South Caucasus. Its geography and seismic position make it particularly vulnerable to earthquakes, floods, landslides, droughts, and forest fires. These hazards are not isolated. They often occur together, causing cascading impacts across sectors such as agriculture, infrastructure, social well-being. And I want to remind about the biggest disaster that occurred in 1988, earthquake in Spitak, which belongs to so-called full cycle earthquakes, foreshocks, main shocks, aftershocks. The intensity at the epicenter was estimated at 10 points. The earthquake covered about 40% of the country territory, where 1 billion people lived. The destruction zone where the earthquake intensity was 8 points and more covered an area of 3,000 square kilometers, and it brought to 25,000 people to death, and more than 20,000 people were injured. So this disaster occurred in past decades, in 1988, but of course we face new challenges especially in last year. I'll speak about it later. So let me speak about the sources, two main sources that we receive information on disaster-related data. The first, Ministry of Environment provides meteorological, hydrological, and environmental data, including climate anomalies and hazardous phenomena. And the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which includes rescue service, collects operational data on emergency situations, event casualties, and response measures. Arstat, as the national statistical authority, is responsible for compiling, verifying, and publishing this data through our regular statistical publications and online platforms. And one of the platform, SDG platform, you see here that we publish the indicators annually, regularly, and this is our annual book, which include more detailed, the most detailed and disaggregated data on environment and natural resources, including disaster data. You see here also the dashboard, SDG dashboard that started from last year. And visualization is better here, of course. So a very important development. Yes, this is the information from Ministry of Environment that we receive. As you see, the monthly average air temperature, monthly average amount and norms of precipitation, deviations from norms, and number of cases of heat waves, and all this information we receive monthly. Hazardous meteorological phenomena. You see here for 2024, this is the annual information. The next very important development is Armenia's draft classifier of emergency cases and events. This is a national effort to create a unified coding and classification system for all types of emergencies, natural, anthropogenic, and social biological. As you see here, it has 5 digits, which gives possibility to make analysis starting from type, class of the disaster until the damage, caused damage. But this is yet a draft version, and we hope that by the end of this year it will be adopted. Another the main information that we receive and publish from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. This is semi-annual reporting form that we receive, and we receive them by, as you see here, natural hazards, by type of hazards, and by number of casualties from registered emergency events, by gender, dead, injured, evacuated, rescued. This is summarized, as you see here, from 2008 till 2024. This is a summarized graph. And as you see here, earthquake is the biggest challenge, the most frequent hazard that occur in Armenia. Here you see just by years, year by year, when they happen, and by types. You see here, just for analyzing and bringing together with climate data. This gives very good information for analytics. And the same here, already by hazardous types. The other information source on losses and damages, I want to mention here that we start to publish these statistics starting from 2024. That the database is constructed based on acts drawn up by regional commissions, and they provide these acts not regularly, as soon as some damage happens, and by demand of those who want to have some compensation from the government. So we cannot compare this data set with the one that we receive from the Ministry of internal affairs. But in any case, we have information, we have a database on damages. Of course, they provide also information on from the monetary part, but as you see here, sometimes the monetary part we do not see, because on the moment then these acts are drawn, the monetary assessment is not finished yet. So that's why we do not publish the monetary part. And as you see here, for example, for heavy wind, we have a lot of damages, but we have nothing to show from the monetary part. These are the legal framework for NDC implementation that our country has adopted. And another, yes, as I said at the beginning, the latest disaster that happened in Lori and Tavush region in 2024, it was flood. And during and after this flood, damages, work for assessment of damages and losses, working groups were formed in order to carry out post-disaster need assessment. So as you see here, by sectors, these working groups were formed, and the lead ministries that were responsible for these sectors, and of course from statistical committee, the respective representatives from our respective sectors were included in this working group, and which was very useful for them, of course, because not all of them know what kind of information, what kind of statistics we have in details. So this was a very good example of collaboration between statistical committee and the line ministries. So I want to stop here. I don't know, I'm not sure whether my colleague from national platform, DRR national platform, is online. Can you I don't know whether he is here, because I wanted him to share his experience of using statistical data in the assessment of risk assessment in communities. So I'm not sure whether he is here. Ashot, are you here? Yes.
Naila, I am afraid we have run our time. So if you also allow, if we have time at the end, we can invite him to provide his insights and also answer the questions raised. So please forgive me.
I tried to cut it short, but
we have exceeded our time. So thank you for giving us the information on the disaster-related statistics, the organizational structure, the data availability, the classification methods, and the publications. All of these very informative inputs today. Thank you so much. So now I will move to our next presenter, Mr. Felipe Ibarra from Chile. He will deliver his presentation on Chile's experience in disaster statistics. Mr. Felipe is the statistical information analyst at the National Disaster Prevention and Response Service of Chile. He's a geographer with a master's degree in geography from the University of Chile, and in his current role, is responsible for managing the institutional statistical system and collaborates on reporting for the Sendai framework monitoring in Chile. Mr. Felipe, over to you, please. Thank you.
Can you hear me, Hakan? Yes? Okay. I will give my presentation in Spanish. Sorry for all audience. Thank you for the interpreters. Buenos días o buenas tardes, buenas noches, depende de dónde se encuentren, a todos los colegas. Para partir mi presentación, primero que todo, quisiera hacer una contextualización muy breve de Chile. Bueno, el 54% de la población en Chile y el 12,9% de su superficie se encuentran expuestas a 3 o más tipos de amenazas. ¿Ya? Esto hace a Chile un escenario, un territorio bastante particular a nivel mundial con respecto a las estadísticas de desastres. Por otra parte, de forma bien breve, quisiera mencionar la breve historia con respecto al sistema estadístico institucional del servicio, que es un sistema estadístico más bien reciente, puesto que recién el año 2015 se instaló el primer profesional dedicado 100% al área estadística dentro del servicio, y ya desde el año 2016 en adelante se creó y se implementó el primer sistema estadístico institucional relacionado a la estadística de desastre. Ya desde el 2016 al presente se han desarrollado una serie de productos tecnológicos y herramientas, como también una serie de clasificadores, protocolos y lineamientos generales para el registro y la utilización de la estadística de desastre. Ahora, con respecto a las herramientas y las plataformas que posee el servicio desde la creación del sistema de ahora en adelante, se encuentran los repositorios de datos, donde se almacenan todos aquellos eventos de emergencia y también estadística y data relacionada a la exposición, vulnerabilidad y capacidad de respuesta dentro del contexto nacional, ¿ya? Para esto se encuentra una plataforma tecnológica donde se puede registrar los diferentes tipos de data de acuerdo a su naturaleza. Por otra parte, a partir de esta data se crean distintos reportes y visualizaciones, ya sean los informes estadísticos y dashboard para su visualización, y también una serie de visualizadores, donde los dos más importantes es el visor GRD, que está relacionado al personal técnico dentro del sistema, y también el visor Chile Preparado, que tiene más bien un objetivo y un foco hacia la comunidad o la población en general. Y por último se encuentran los indicadores, donde se encuentra el indicador de los factores subyacentes del riesgo, del cual voy a hablar brevemente ahora, y que es un indicador, bueno, que se creó el año 2017, de acuerdo a una metodología para identificar aquellos, valga la redundancia, los factores que generaban riesgo dentro de la población en las 345 comunas o localidades dentro del territorio de Chile. Esta metodología se desarrolló el año 2017 y se evaluó entre el periodo 2017 al 2019, y actualmente, para hacer una actualización de este levantamiento de datos, se aplicó entre los años 2023 al 2025, ¿ya? Para hacer una comparación entre los datos de 7 años atrás y qué es lo que está pasando en la actualidad con los territorios. Esta metodología posee 4 dimensiones y 41 indicadores, y las dimensiones son gobernanza, ordenamiento territorial, condiciones socioeconómicas, cambio climático y recursos naturales, ¿ya? De estas 4 dimensiones salen 41 indicadores mediante una encuesta autodeclarativa de los municipios y las localidades, a los cuales les da un factor de riesgo, ¿ya? Y esta categorización de riesgo de los territorios tiene que ver con las siguientes indicaciones, que puede ser un nivel alto de riesgo, el cual requiere acciones urgentes, un nivel moderado, que requiere mejoramientos, un nivel bajo, que requiere constante monitoreo, y un nivel mínimo, que requiere un seguimiento más bien básico. ¿Cómo se materializa esto en su aplicación? Bueno, los resultados de este índice en el periodo 2017-2019 se obtuvo las 345 comunas del país, donde se puede ver el mapa territorial completo de Chile y cómo se manifiesta el riesgo dentro de los distintos territorios, ¿ya? Cuando uno hace un acercamiento dentro de la visualización, que es un visualizador dentro de la plataforma de ArcGIS Online, uno puede identificar las comunas, los territorios y poder descargar un informe de estas mediciones. En el caso del ejemplo de la comuna de Santiago, que es la comuna central del país, por ejemplo, dentro del informe aparece el siguiente resultado, una comparación entre el periodo anterior y el periodo actual, entre el periodo 2017 y el 2025. Entonces se da también como resultado de la última respuesta a la encuesta, que Santiago redujo su nivel de riesgo desde el nivel moderado del año 2017 a un nivel bajo en el 2025. Esto nos permite contrastar cómo se encuentran los distintos territorios dentro del país y poder tomar medidas necesarias en la medida de la reducción del riesgo de desastre. Por otra parte, no solo nos permite medir la situación actual del país y compararlas con escenarios anteriores, sino que también este indicador ha sido ocupado desde el año 2024 y el actual el 2025 en un programa de financiamiento público que se llama Programa de Gestión del Riesgo de Desastre, en el cual todos los años se disponen de $850.000 como fondo total y que los distintos municipios del país pueden concursar para elaborar o actualizar su estrategia, ya sea de reducción del riesgo de desastre o sus estrategias de emergencia y sus distintos protocolos. Entre el periodo del 2024 al 2025, ya 150 localidades dentro de las 345 se han adjudicado fondos y esta metodología del indicador nos permite priorizar hacia dónde se pueden dirigir los recursos de acuerdo a las necesidades o los altos niveles de riesgo que poseen las localidades. Aquí se ve una tabla donde no pretendo ahondar, pero ya acá se ve, por ejemplo, la adjudicación de una comuna con fondos que este año para el 2025 se adjudicó entre los $7.000 y $7.500 para elaborar su plan de reducción de riesgo de desastre. ¿Bien? Entonces, algunos desafíos, la línea base y disponibilidad de datos, de manera muy breve, que se consideran dentro de la data de Chile, es la fragmentación institucional, donde los datos se encuentran distribuidos en distintas agencias y sectores. También la limitación de disponibilidad de datos dentro del nivel local, que son los gaps subnacionales, y las capacidades limitadas dentro del nivel local, donde hay una falta de recursos para producir datos de calidad. Y estos desafíos son compartidos por muchos países y que requieren esfuerzos de cooperación internacional. ¿Cómo se pueden atender estos desafíos? Ya sea mediante la gobernanza estadística, mediante la coordinación interinstitucional y también que el marco global de estadística de desastre va en la misma línea, ¿no? De generar un lenguaje común y que los distintos países podamos colaborar entre sí, ya que compartiríamos el mismo lenguaje. También el fortalecimiento de las capacidades institucionales con inversión en capacidades humanas y tecnológicas y también la generación de plataformas abiertas y transparentes que permitan la disponibilidad de datos públicos, confiables y transparentes con respecto a la accesibilidad de los datos. Y a modo de conclusión, se evidencia que los datos o el fortalecimiento, los datos permiten fortalecer la gestión pública para poder decidir y tomar decisiones basadas en evidencias de data y redirigir los recursos públicos hacia donde más se requieran en términos de reducción del riesgo de desastre, y también que los datos transforman cómo se administra la reducción del riesgo hacia la planificación territorial, la anticipación de amenazas, el tiempo de respuesta y las respuestas basadas en información o en evidencia. Y por último, mencionar que Chile se está moviendo hacia la acción, hacia un sistema integrado de datos, dado que la ley 21.364, que norma el servicio desde el año 2021 en adelante, menciona que Chile debe avanzar hacia un sistema integrado de información dentro del sistema, donde se encuentran todos aquellos organismos de monitoreo de las amenazas, como también todos aquellos que participan en la respuesta y la reducción del riesgo. Así que más bien esto sería mi presentación. Thank you very much for your attention. Y quedo atento a preguntas. Muchas gracias, Hakan. Devuelvo la palabra.
Thank you so much, Mr. Felipe, for being on time. And it's great to hear from you that Chile has a good country practice for producing some indicators and index for risk drivers. And also these are, as I see, used in some programs for financing disaster risk reduction and for preparatory purposes. And you also mentioned not only challenges, but also provided some solutions to these issues from a Chile perspective. Thank you so much for this very good presentation and for your contribution today. Now, I want to move to this next presenter, Miss Luisa Liambo from Namibia. Miss Luisa is a GIS analyst from Namibia Statistics Agency, and today she will be presenting us Namibia's experiences and challenges in collecting and measuring disaster statistics. Miss Luisa, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Luis, are you speaking? We cannot hear anything from you yet.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Is my presentation visible?
If there's a problem with presenting your slides, okay, now we can see. Thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Loise Yambo. As indicated, I'll just give briefly the experiences and challenges of Namibia on collecting disaster-related statistics in the country. So to give context, Namibia is susceptible to natural hazard and disasters, which is primarily related to climate and is considered most risk when accounting for disaster.
Sorry to interrupt, but could you please put your PowerPoint in slide mode? Okay. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's fine now. I was wondering, okay. So Namibia is skeptical to nature hazard and disasters, as mentioned, which are primarily considered because of climate factors and where most at risk because our population is relatively low, which is 3.2 million, and most of the disasters experienced here is reoccurring droughts, floods, disease outbreaks, wild and structural fires, and there are other risks such as heat waves, rise of sea levels, but those are relatively not reoccurring and experienced at very little times. So the institutional framework that guides disaster risk collection in the country is coordinated through the Office of the Prime Minister. This is the institutional framework that guides it. It's also guided by the Legal Framework on Disaster Risk Management Act of 2012. This is under the Office of the Prime Minister, which is then under the Office of the President. We have at a national level a Disaster Risk Management Committee, which then forms this unit, the Directorate of Disaster Risk Management that I mentioned, that is responsible for coordinating all disaster risk management activities in the country. This unit deals with two arms. It does the Namibia vulnerability assessment. It as well as has national focal person from various ministries, agencies that report on various disasters. At the regional level, we also have Regional Disaster Management Committee. This goes down as well to local level, constituency level, and as far as settlement level. So all these local units then report to the regional level, further at the national level to the National Disaster Risk Committee. The role of the National Statistic Agency or Namibia Statistic Agency, we provide metadata population household statistics to the Directorate of Disaster Risk Management for assessment of vulnerable population for disasters, as well as to assist them with the reporting on the global framework on the Sendai framework. We also coordinate through the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, the collection of geospatial data for disaster risk management, for floods, for drought. But at the moment, we really have a challenge in this area. Most of the data that we have at the moment is mostly on fire and floods only. Other areas such as drought, we still need to strengthen that area. The agency also has an environmental statistic unit, but it's not really active in collecting disaster-related statistics yet. So at a global level that I mentioned, the country also reports on various indicators of the Sendai framework, all 38 indicators. These are derived from incident reports, assessment reports, data obtained from our roads authority and the motor vehicle funds on accidents. Most of the data, such as on fire incidents at local level, are derived through our local authority through the Ministry of Urban and Rural Development. The country is also busy at the moment with its country reporting at a global level for the Sendai framework. Our experiences in collecting disaster-related statistics, as I mentioned, various ministries and agencies are collecting various statistics on disaster, such as we find that drought monitoring is, for instance, done through the vulnerability and assessment and analysis by the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Land Reform. Flood monitoring is under the same ministry, but the Division of Hydrology is responsible for doing flood monitoring in the country, and they collect data and statistics within this area. Then the other area on fire monitoring is under the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism. They monitor fire over time. This is wildfires in our national park conservation areas, and they have a real-time fire monitoring system in place. On seismic activities experience also in the country, we have the Ministry of Industries, Mines and Energy that have a seismological system that monitors earthquake activities at a national level. Then in terms of pandemics, diseases, we have the Ministry of Health and Social Services that is monitoring statistics like for the previous pandemic on COVID-19. We also stepped in with the National Statistic Agency to help them assist with collecting statistics on daily cases and developed a dashboard, but they are the responsible party in terms of pandemics and health. We also have the Ministry of Works that collects data on infrastructure damages in the country at a national level. So all these different ministries and agencies then report to the Directorate of Disaster Risk Management in the country to assist with response and facilitate assistance in terms of a disaster. So our achievements as a country, one of the main one was we achieved was the National Risk Profile. This is a comprehensive study that was done to provide a baseline for the country, especially in terms of what are the possible risks and what are the possible vulnerability the population is exposed to. This study was done at the lowest level of at the spatial scale where we used the population enumeration area for the latest census in 2023. And it looked at about 9 hazards in the country. This was including flood, frost, earthquake, windstorms, lightning, wildfires, sea level rise, diseases, and as well as earthquakes. So this profile needed to be done for a country for us to establish a baseline. As I said, not much has been done in terms of many agencies were not really collecting or seeing what are the risks as a country. So, but however, we do have other systems in place like meteorological services that is always giving us information about climate and weather forecasting. Hydrological services I mentioned earlier, monitor floods and dam levels, especially in seasons of when we experience higher rainfall. The northern areas are very skeptical to floods. Then we have a live fire monitoring system that sits with the Ministry of Environment under the Directorate of Forestry. The National Seismological Network that is under the Geological Survey, they monitor seismic activities for the country. Then in addition, the Disaster Risk Management Unit also has a disinventar system, which is just a disaster information management system with methodologies that are developed to collect and analyze and visualize data on occurrence and impacts of disasters in the country. And this also has historical data. And in addition, the country also uses the Sendai Framework Monitor system to report annually. This is just a few maps. This is just a maps showing the drought vulnerability. These are one of the maps that were derived from our risk profile launched last year. As you can see, this was from 1990 to 2022. The frequency, and then another map shows drought vulnerability at the same in areas from very high categories to moderate, low, and very high. As you can see, most areas in the northern part of the country are very vulnerable to drought. Then this one shows flood risk for the population. Like I indicated, in the northern areas, when we receive high rainfalls, you see both in the urban and rural areas, some of these households are vulnerable to floods. Challenges. Yes, we have challenges, just like other countries have shared. Our early warning system are fragmented, as mentioned. You have Ministry of Forestry monitoring fire, another ministry monitoring floods. These agencies are not collecting this data and statistics in a standardized method. The data is not always available in timely and a reliable time when it's needed. There's limited geospatial data for disaster risk management in the country, and we hope to strengthen that area as well, as I mentioned. There's limited disaggregated data, inadequate data and quality within some sectors, which are not reporting at all, or it's always hard to get statistics about it. And then we have limited resources of statistical activities for collecting disaster-related statistics. But we hope.
Louisa, sorry to interrupt. Just a quick reminder that we are approaching the end of our time, so let's take it as an early warning. Thank you.
All right, no. All right, I'm just concluding. So one of the opportunities and achievements is that as a country, we are trying to establish a national emergency operations centers where all these early warning system will be integrated and to enhance the data collection on disaster-related statistics. We see that there's an increasing demand for official statistics on disaster, and as the National Statistic Agency, we want to better collaborate with the Disaster Risk Management Unit in the Office of the Prime Minister to strengthen this area, leverage on innovative technologies that are available out there, such as Earth observation data, and enhance our early warning system, continue collaboration with stakeholders to strengthen this coordination and collaborating to get this statistical data, and increase the use of national standards and classification and guidelines across ministries. This brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you so much, and I will be available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Louisa, for your perfect presentation on explaining us the Namibia case for disaster-related statistics. It's interesting to see that your institution reports Sendai framework as an NSO, which is usually done by national disaster management agencies in countries. And also we see that flood, fire, seismic, pandemic related data are being collected and monitored in Namibia. And as a good practice, we see risk profiles are produced. Thank you so much. Now we will move on to the next presenter, Mr. Dr. Aaron Irons-Gardner from Lloyd's Register Foundation. He will be speaking on World Risk Poll 2024 Global Data to Understand Risk and Harm. Dr. Aaron, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I will give a quick overview of this World Risk Poll, which is quite a different data set to the things that other people have talked about in this session so far. So the Lloyd's Register Foundation, just for those who don't know, we are a global, independently funded global safety charity with a mission to engineer a safer world through interventions and by understanding risk and safety around the world. So as part of that, to actually get a global picture of what risk and safety means, we have this World Risk Poll, and it basically goes out into the world and it asks people what they worry about in terms of their safety and also what their experiences of harm are. So it's a unique survey in that it's person focused, and it's also global in nature. So we surface voices from underserved regions where maybe people are talking and want to share their experiences, but people aren't listening to them. So because of this, we can ensure that there's a global equity in the things that we talk about. It's the latest data set that's available on our website and all of the reports. It's the 3rd edition, 147,000 people across 142 countries. 2 prior waves before that in 2021 and 2019. And our 4th edition, what will be the World Risk Poll 2026, is currently in the field now. So our broad areas of interest are, like I say, everyday risks. We also work with many agencies. So here I've just put a few of the examples. So the OECD, the ILO, to look at very targeted specific risks. So things like workplace safety, severe weather with UNDR, waste with UNEP, but most relevant for this talk that I'm going to talk on here is our resilience module. So I'll very quickly load this in. This is a nice whizzy animation that we have on our website, which builds up what's called our resilience index. On the right-hand side here, you can see the questions in our poll which contribute to that index. We have lots of different dimensions. So we ask about individual agency. So if a disaster was occur near you in the future, do you think there's anything you can do? And then we enrich it with other bits of information like educational, financial, disaster planning. This resilience index has been found to be a really useful tool because it can subset different populations, different regions, geographies, and understand resilience at like a base level. But what's really interesting are some of the questions that aren't in the resilience index that I'll just go through quickly here. So one of the things we ask people is, what's the most impactful disaster that you experienced? We then code this into all of these different options out here. And then we go and further enrich that. So we know that these people have experienced a disaster arising from a natural hazard, but we want to know more things about them. So the most relevant question here is we ask, thinking about that, did you receive any advance warning about that? And if you did, where did you receive it through? What channel did you receive it through? And then we also take it further. So we think, were you able to take any action ahead of this experience with that information that you received? You received the information, but were you able to do anything with it? Then we also think about afterwards. So if there was something in the future, like, you've experienced this harm, maybe you've received a warning or you didn't receive a warning. If you were to experience a subsequent disaster arising from a natural hazard in the future, do you think there's anything that you could do to protect yourself or your family? And then also whether people, based on their experiences, they develop household management plans to deal with any future natural hazards. And then finally, we ask this nice question at the end that wraps it all up, is basically, do we think that the following groups are well prepared to deal with a disaster arising from a natural hazard in your country, focusing on the national and local government? So those are the questions that go out. How do we go about getting the data for it? So the World Risk Poll sits alongside the Gallup World Poll that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So this is a benefit because it gives us a highly enriched demographic data set. So we have age, financial metrics, gender, education, all of this enriching information that we can use to subset, aggregate and disaggregate the data in various different ways. The questions that go out there are developed in collaboration with subject matter experts and with Gallup to ensure that we're asking the right questions to fill data gaps that people need to know about. So we know we want to phrase a question in a specific way to address a problem, and we can work out how to get that. And then importantly, these are fully localized and delivered by a local polling partner. So it's not just that they're translated, they are fully localized to give the context to the people that we're interviewing on the ground. And it's delivered by a local polling partner to build that trust and the rapport between the interviewee and the responders. Obviously, we would love to go out and sample as many people as possible, but because it does have to be a sampled thing, but we try and use the best approach possible. So it's to give a randomly sampled representative population in all of the countries polled. In Europe, North America, developed Asia, and most of the Gulf regions, this is delivered by a phone-based methodology, and using Gallup's screening methodology to ensure good geographical and other demographic distributions. The rest of the world, the poll is delivered face-to-face. So people go out into the field and they ensure that they're in the different distinct geographies and regions of each country and around the world to get these answers and to really understand people's perceptions at the local level. Obviously, with a sampling method, it's not going to be perfect, so it is then reweighted to adjust for the variance and to align with national statistics for the country. And this is important because, as I've said, this is not just a standalone poll that we do. It exists every 2 years. By the 2029, we'll have 7 waves of data. This reweighting allows us to do cross-country comparison, but it also allows us to do wave comparisons within countries to see how countries are changing and responding to the events that are happening globally and within their own borders. And then finally, we just have a global margin of error of around 3.1 at a 95% confidence. So the findings that we can pull out of the data, we can be reasonably confident when we see a big difference. And we do often see quite big differences in findings. So just to go through some of the issues and benefits of the dataset before I go in and just give a really quick example of something that we can pull out. Obviously, it's still a sample. We'd love to poll everyone globally, but unfortunately, no billionaire has come along and agreed to fund that for us yet. So low population density countries and regions can be challenging to geographically weight to make sure that they're representative. This also means that we can miss tightly localized disaster experiences. If something occurs in a very tight geographical region, but we're not sampling in that region, then we will miss that event. And then also in the non-face-to-face regions where it's delivered through mobile telephone or landline telephone accesses, we are at the risk of higher technological biases. We are excluding people from committing to the poll if they don't have access to the technologies that we're delivering the poll through. And then finally, one that's very specific to us is that often well, not often, but sometimes we can be blocked or limited in our polling. So generally, these are questions about discrimination, experience of discrimination and trust in government and government experiences. But it does sometimes lapse into the resilience and disaster preparedness. For example, in 2023 in Gabon, we were not able to ask that question about the receipt of an early warning. So those are the issues, but the strengths. So I've kind of alluded to it all the way through this quick presentation, but it's a demographically rich bottom-up approach to data, which is quite distinct in a data set. So it's looked at the person level, and you can look at an individual person's response, and you can follow that all the way through, and then you can aggregate and disaggregate across all of the demographics that we have. It's truly global. We'd like to get more countries, but we are limited in where we can go, but we're as global as we can be, and where we can go into a country, we will go into that country. And then the real strength is the trending. So we are now at 4 waves with the launch next year of our 2026 poll. For resilience, we have 3 waves, and we have confirmation that the World Risk Poll and the resilience modules will continue for at least another 2 waves in 2027 and 2029. So this trended data set allows you to look at temporal changes, but it also allows us to blend the data sets together where maybe we're not interested in time elements. We can blend that data set together, and all of a sudden, rather than 1,000 people in a country, we'll have several thousand people in a country that we can look at the data for. And this really increases our understanding. And then most importantly, the data set is entirely free to download and use. It's on our website. You can go and read in much more detail about the methodology. You can download the data and use it as you see fit. It's a gift from the foundation to the world. So I will very quickly give a little example of what sort of things we can do with the data. So we have our data explorer on our website, which is a really good way for people to come in and explore the data. I'm just going to run through this very quickly, but here we can see I've picked on the map view the percentage of people in a country who've experienced a disaster. So we can see in Morocco, 59% compared to Algeria at 14%. As I said, we can really geographically enrich that. So we zoom in again and we look at the subnational levels, and we can see that experience again is very, very high. And then one very last quick flip over. So changing the question at this point from experiencing a disaster to receiving a warning about that, we can see that a real issue arises. So that high experience of disaster in Morocco does not correlate into people receiving warning about that disaster. So this is much likely to be the earthquake that occurred in Morocco early in 2023. We can see that people received no warning about that, and that increased the significance of the harm that it could do. Whereas in next door, people who maybe experienced that same disaster, but to a lesser extent, the warning levels, and obviously there was a temporal element that they were further away and maybe more able to receive warnings, the warning levels were significantly higher and people received that warning level. And then just the last thing to wrap up is the really nice thing about the data is that we can see what impact people's experiences has on their future planning. So here we've split the data by people across the globe. If they experienced a disaster arising from a natural hazard, did they receive a warning about it? So on the left, we have people who did not receive a warning, and on the right, we have people who received a warning. Then the color bars, it's asking whether you think you're able to protect yourself and your family in the future. And this nice pink color is the proportion of people who say yes. So among those who did not receive a warning, 47% of people said they felt they would be able to protect themselves and their families in the future. But if they had received a warning previously for a previous disaster, this rises to 68%. So it shows how important it is. It's not just a one-off event. It creates a virtuous cycle and circle of trust. If people receive warning about disasters, they maybe feel that they have more agency to deal with them in the future.
Aaron, apologize for interrupting. We are out of time. So could you please wrap up? Thank you.
I am wrapped up. That is my final slide. That's our website QR code. And if you've got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them via email or in the chat.
Thank you so much for this interesting presentation that provided us very rich information from human-centered people-focused survey. And I think, also helps to close a gap from a human perspective in terms of disaster risks, resilience, preparedness, and early warnings. Thank you for you to be with us today and share your insights. Thank you so much. And now, as I see, we are in the end of our time. So I would kindly ask a few more minutes to share the Slido outcomes, our poll. So I would ask our host to share the. Okay, now we see our question was, what are the key actions that we can take to collect better exposure, vulnerability, and coping capacity data to help reduce disaster risk? We see that most of you have voted for collaboration. We see coordination, standardized indicators, participatory mapping, communication, vulnerability, collaborate, geospatial data, and so on. Thank you so much for taking your time and attending this quick poll. I would like to thank all speakers for sharing their insights and experiences, for stimulating this discussion and further development. And I would also thank all of you for your engagement. And see you tomorrow at session 5. And I am giving the floor Mr. Chuan if he wants to say a few words to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hakan, for giving me the floor. I know we're running out of time, so just want to once again really appreciate the time and the effort for all the panelists and the speakers for sharing so many exciting and interesting project outputs and programs related to the disaster risk data. We have seen that there's so many different type of data and different innovative use, and I hope this session can serve as something to help the audience to think about the different type of data and the different use of data and collaborate further with your partners and stakeholders. And also want to mention that this session is anchored around the chapter 4, which related to the disaster risk data statistic of the G-DRSF, and we hope that it can provide some basic idea of what the framework is about. It's about collecting data much broader than just the traditional disaster occurrence and impact, but to have the exposure and the hazard fully measured and understood. So the framework is the global constellation is closing today. So if you have a few more hours, there's still time to look at it. But other than that, just want to say thank you so much. Okay, so I think we can close the session today and see you all for tomorrow. Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye, colleagues. Thank you.